Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for staying with us for the last panel of the day. And we're finishing with food. So isn't that the best way to finish it? And actually, I was very happy to see that we took the time to put agriculture and agri-food on the program today, because it is a perfect example of the impact of the relationship between Canada and EU, and particularly in terms of complementarity, as David mentioned earlier. The fact that we have an alignment in terms of value and policy objectives makes actually a great opportunity for additional collaboration, and particularly in terms of agri-tech and innovation. So today we actually have two specific commodities with us, so agriculture, grain, and we have a perspective is a bit more general that will bring us a bit of content in terms of the agriculture in general. So let's start with the first question. How do Canada and the EU address the challenges of food security and sustainable agricultural practices? I'd like to start with Jean-Luc, that actually will have a broader perspective.
Hello, yes, I'm Jean-Luc Archambault. I'm the founder of Lysios, which is a French government relations firm based in Brussels and in Paris, and we have clients among many industries, including raw materials and agri-food as well. So yes, how does the EU address the challenges? Well, the first remark I want to raise is that the famous Mario Draghi report on the competitiveness of the EU does not say anything about agri-food. There's no specific chapter. There are specific chapters on energy, semiconductor, etc., but it says almost nothing on agri-food. That's interesting. But of course, there will be an agriculture and food commissioner, Christophe Hansen, in principle, from Luxembourg. And so he has a mission letter of President von der Leyen that stresses the need to promote innovation and emerging products, not only the sustainability of agri-food, etc., of course, which are the main main targets. But innovation and emerging products are mentioned in the mission letter, and the mission letter refers to the conclusions of the strategic dialogue on the future of EU agriculture that has been conducted during all this year. And among its conclusions, you have principle number 8 that says that the EU should leverage technology and innovation to support the transition, the ecological transition of the agri-food industry. And it also says that a temporary just transition fund should be established outside the common agriculture policy, which accounts for 30% of the EU budget already. So there should be an additional temporary fund to facilitate the transition of the EU agriculture, so including through the use of technology.
Thank you. Krista?
Thank you. So I'm representing the Canada Grains Council, which is a value chain industry association in Canada, representing the seed sector, farmers, exporters for all of Canada's major field crops. So I focus on biotechnology and seed innovation. So that's the lens I'm going to be speaking, replying to these questions today. So Canada and the EU both recognize that agricultural sustainability and climate change are very interconnected issues that are going to require collaborative solutions in order to solve. And with climate change, both the EU and Canada are seeing similar challenges, right? Drought is one example where we know that water scarcity is going to continue to cause headwinds for global food production. Certainly in Northern and Western Europe, you've had the opposite problem with too much water recently, but in Southern Europe, in Western Canada, and around the world, we've been in a very severe drought cycle, the worst that we've seen in decades, and this is a challenge that will continue. With climate change, we also see new disease pressures that traditional methods just really can't keep up with. Has anyone in the room heard of olive quick decline syndrome? It's a disease that is killing olive trees in southern Italy. There's no cure at the moment. It's a concern, got a few nodding heads. It's a concern in the Mediterranean as well. And similarly in Canada, we have smaller crops where we have a lot of sustainability benefits if we could integrate them into our crop rotations. But there are disease pressures that really make them unpalatable for farmers who want a reliable yield when they select which crops they're going to grow. So challenges like this can be addressed through seed innovation, whether that's through biotechnology or newer plant breeding techniques. But we have some challenges in implementing these new technologies. Certainly misinformation and consumer perception is a challenge. We're in a time in the world when trust in government institutions and science is perhaps lower than in the past. So in order to really benefit from these innovations and addressing these serious global problems, we need to make sure that science-based and evidence-based policies are going to rule the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. Tanja, you want to address the first question?
Sure. So I represent Hatchblue, which is a global investment and innovation company, and we're all about supporting technologies and innovation when it comes to supporting a more sustainable food system. I think Canada and Europe has a very important role to play when it comes to kind of fixing a quite broken food system out there. I think there is a huge need in terms of seeing how we can transition the food system. We definitely in Hatchblue do think that aquaculture plays an important role when it comes to both feeding a growing population and doing it in kind of the right way with a kind of a sustainable solutions to it. Hatchblue, we have also made several investments in Canada, so we have quite good visibility in when it comes to relevant technologies and innovation that we definitely think are applicable when it comes to supporting a more sustainable food system. I think both when it comes to a lot of agri-tech solutions, I mean, on the panels earlier today, we talked a lot about AI, we're talking also about in terms of biosecurity technologies and measures and so on. All these technologies are hugely also important and valuable when it comes to implementing them into our food value production as well. Secondly, also Canada is a major producer when it comes to raw materials for the food sector. And at the moment, I mean, EU is importing food products and raw materials to go into the food value chains. And these raw materials that we are importing to EU into the food value chains, both to the blue and green sector, are being imported from very long distance, and many of them produced in a very highly unsustainable kind of a way. I definitely see an opportunity in terms of with Canada to kind of use that agri-food technology and the innovation platform that has been developed and see how these solutions can be applied, what I like to call kind of the new frontiers when it comes to the food system, when it comes to aquaculture. So just as an example, we have made an investment now in an AI company that is using smart vision AI-based technologies to identify harmful organisms that we see in oceans that can help ocean farmers identify in terms of harmful algae blooms. Secondly, we have also invested in single-cell protein companies in Canada that are developing highly sustainable raw material ingredients to be used in food systems here in Europe. So I think there's tremendous opportunities for stronger collaboration, but definitely want to challenge the audience here as well to think about aquaculture as a kind of a wider scope in terms of our food system.
Thank you, Tanja. Any of the two other speakers would like to add any specific example in terms of opportunity for collaboration in terms of agri-tech between EU and Canada? Jean-Luc?
Said the Draghi report says almost nothing about agriculture. It says, nevertheless, that there should be an EU vertical artificial intelligence plan with money behind it, and for different industries, automotive, etc., but including agriculture with a spatial focus on space-generated Earth observation data, because of course, I think that space and agriculture is an area of particular interest for most of the agriculture industry, for most farmers. So agriculture is important for Canada and space as well, and vice versa in the EU. And for instance, today, well, we have the Galileo positioning system in the EU, and most of the new machinery, agricultural machinery, are connected to Galileo. So I think that on space and agriculture, there is a significant space for innovation and joint cooperation with Canada. If I may take another example, it's with AI. One of our clients, Danone, which has significant operations in Canada, has signed a partnership with, Microsoft, it's not a Canadian company, on AI for predictive maintenance, for manufacturing, smarter logistics, or digital twins for the development of new products. So I think that AI, there's a booming landscape of AI companies, I think on both sides of it, and the Atlantic, including Canada. That's another example of area where there could be partnerships between EU and Canada.
Thank you. Krista?
I think there are many opportunities for regulatory cooperation between Canada and the EU. Because when we look ahead, there may be many innovations that help to address growing global population. I know we hear about population decline very frequently these days, but for the next few decades, we have a growing population, more demand for protein, and there's many new innovations coming that can help to meet that need. But in the short term, we're facing pressure to produce more food, and we want to be able to do that in a way that does not put pressure on sensitive ecosystems and pressure to bring more land into agricultural production than is needed, which means we need to produce more on the land that we have. So Canada's plant breeding and the EU's plant breeding industries, I think, share a commitment to leveraging these tools to produce varieties with higher yields, better pest resistance, more climate resiliency. I know there's a lot of folks in the room who maybe aren't from agriculture, so I'd like to ask, does anyone have a vegetable garden at home? Any vegetable gardeners? So maybe you will understand the joy that can be brought to a cold, dark Canadian heart come end of January when it is -20 or colder and the days are short, when that seed catalog arrives in the mail. I mean, it's the highlight. And you'll flip open the cover and you'll see a splash page of best new varieties for 2025. And there's usually 10 or 20 varieties there that are slightly more disease resistant or have a new flavor or color profile. The same thing happens for farmers, but on a much larger scale. So in 2023, there were over 400 new crop varieties with little incremental improvements made in their disease resistance or regional adaptation for farmers, 400 released in Canada that year. And in the EU, I don't know the number, I imagine it's a few thousand. So I'm just trying to put that in context when I'm speaking about plant breeding. This is an industry that is very active and very important in supporting agricultural productivity. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanja.
So totally agree with both of my panel participants here. I think maybe one topic that we just need to kind of bring on the agenda, and that's definitely when it comes to these new gene editing technologies. It's both something that we need to kind of address, right? Because it does represent a tremendous opportunity when it comes to creating a more sustainable food system, but also a technology and innovation that we need to be quite careful around. So I think there is still a lot of knowledge and research that needs to be further explored and investigated. We are definitely seeing that both from a raw material perspective, but also when it comes to food production, that these technologies are being more implemented. For aquaculture, it's still very much novel technologies. It's very much dependent on regulations. And definitely EU, Canada might have different views in terms of implementation of these technologies, but I think definitely this is something that we need to kind of bring up on the agenda and have some kind of a pathway moving forward in terms of how are we planning to kind of utilize these opportunities, but at the same time also be kind of cautious when it comes to the utilization of it.
Thank you. Actually, it's perfectly way for the next question, and I'm hoping that the people from the Canadian government and European Commission in the room will actually pick us on that. I think we've talked about alignment of policies objective, but one thing we'll definitely need further conversation is about science-based and what you just mentioned about biotechnology engine. That is a topic where actually our countries have a bit of learning and exchanging to be done. So if you can say that way. So that might be actually one of the, well, my next question was about opportunities and challenges in terms of that relationship. But I think we need to take a note, someone needs to take a note that the conversation needs to continue on those topics so that we can all align and because at the end of the day, we all want to produce in a sustainable manner that next food that we all need. And we need to find a way to do it together. So that's definitely a great objective. So would you have to any other exception of opportunities and challenge that we can actually work together? You want to start, maybe Krista?
I think this is a nice follow-on from the last comment about gene editing. Because I want to go back to my my example there in 2023 when we had 400 new seed varieties made available to Canadian farmers that year. So each of those varieties was probably in development for 7 to 12 years or more. Each of those varieties developed through traditional methods probably cost about, on average, $1 million Canadian to bring to market. And that same year, we had these 400 traditional varieties come forward. We had 2 GMO events approved in Canada. So my colleagues at CropLife International tell me that the average cost of developing one of those GMO events and bringing it to market globally is about $120 million USD. So quite a difference in cost between developing a GMO and developing a traditional variety. Part of that cost is the global regulatory complexity that we face. Before those 2 GM events, that they're fully legal now to grow in Canada, but those events the industry will not allow those events to be grown until they also have regulatory approvals in all of the key markets that Canada exports to. And that means an 8 to 10 year delay. So that's 8 to 10 years that a Canadian farmer cannot access those varieties until they're approved in all of the key major markets. And I think this is a challenge that the EU and Canada really share because we're both major grain producers and grain exporters. So as we introduce these new breeding techniques, it's my hope that we don't end up in the same position with, let's imagine a public sector breeder in France and another in Saskatoon developing drought-resistant wheat. They'll have to get clearances for those products in every major market before they can be grown. And if we produce a global regulatory environment that is as expensive as it is for GMOs, we're not going to be able to use this technology. So I fully agree with my colleagues here on the panel about the importance of science-based and evidence-based regulation. But I think it's also important to look at the global cumulative cost that we're imposing. And Canada and the EU have, again, shared interests in implementing sustainability tools, and we're well positioned in global forums to have a dialogue around regulatory cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you. Jean-Luc, anything to add?
Oh, yes, I agree. The Draghi report, one of its main mottos is that the EU should invest more and regulate less. So I think it really makes sense across many areas. Although, of course, it's the very difficult task of politicians to convince the populations that are, of course, cautious of their health, that it's indeed science-based regulation, no over-regulation, no under-regulation either, but we should streamline all those processes. It's crazy that it takes 10 years to have a new GMO product approved. And so I think we will not be too many of there should be a transatlantic dialogue between Canada and the EU to move simultaneously along streamlining those regulations.
Thank you. Tanja?
Yeah, maybe just a comment. I mean, when we talk about food, we also need to include the consumers. And sometimes it's quite strange, but sometimes we kind of tend to forget the consumers a bit when it comes to talking about new innovations or technologies. Just take an example from in terms of what we are feeding our fish. I mean, it used to be more fish-based ingredients that we were kind of feeding fish. Now we made our fish almost to be vegetarian, right? Where the major ingredient in terms of farm fish today is soy. So it's a quite big transition, right? And I think that we are really, it's a big challenge if we don't kind of also include consumers when it comes to how we are planning to change that food systems. And I think also when it comes to the regulatory perspectives as well, we need to get the consumers on board. And so I think there's a huge need for both Canada and EU from a government perspective to take responsibility when it comes to awareness and education around these new technologies.
Thank you. We started the day with a discussion on Horizon Europe and funding of research and development. And I'd like to hear you a bit on that, because in agriculture, we just mentioned the challenge. I think it is also investment funding is key to the sector. So I'd like to hear you a bit on that.
Oh, yes, regarding Horizon Europe, as you know, it's a global R&D funding system that accounts for roughly 15 billion euros per year currently, out of which 10% are devoted to bioeconomy and environment, which includes agri-food. So along the areas that are supported by Horizon Europe, you have new protein alternatives to foster plant-based diets, because diet is a major issue as well. But you also have, for instance, for the food industry, biodegradable food packaging, which is also an issue, or organic farming, or preventing plant disease and animal disease as well. So there are many areas where Horizon Europe can fund collaborative innovation projects. And so if your question is also how Canadian entities, companies, research centers can participate, well, I think you have experts here. So the answer is yes. The Canadian entities can be part of consortiums presenting a Horizon Europe project. And for instance, I know, but I'm not the best to speak about that. The Canadian Research Coordinating Committee, the CRCC, has established a co-funding mechanism that provides Canadian money to Canadian entities that are willing to participate, because the EU funds the participation of partners, of third country partners from low-income countries, but not from rich countries. So they have to bring their own money, their own food in the projects. But on July the 3rd this year, an agreement has been signed between Canada and the EU on Horizon Europe, and so now Canada will bring a contribution to Horizon Europe that will allow Canadian entities to participate to Horizon Europe projects as if they were European entities. And of course, there needs to be some balance between the contributions each ways. But so it's really open. And I don't know. I don't have the figures. I'm sorry. To what an extent this cooperation is implemented today, but there's probably room for improvement.
Thank you. Anybody else?
So I think there are tremendous opportunity in the Horizon Euro program. And maybe my encouragement here is that there are so many relevant technologies that are kind of coming out of the ecosystem of Canada that are so applicable also for aquaculture. So I want to kind of keep everyone's mindset a little bit open, that not only kind of look in terms of the green food value chains, but also the blue food value chains as well. I mean, AI, aquaculture 4.0 is fully now being rolled out. Canada, with your strong AI businesses and opportunities, strongly applicable when it comes to also helping farmers to have a better kind of a more predictive analysis and also a better monitoring in terms of their farming operations and systems. And for Hatch Blue, I mean, many of the investments that we are doing in new ventures and technology innovations are actually coming from other industries, from medicine, agri-tech, from ocean-based monitoring, from the oil and gas industry. So I think using maybe also Horizon Europe to see how could Canadian enterprises also explore new market opportunities within the food system could also be quite catalytic in terms of new business opportunities.
Thank you. And coming from the dairy sector, I need to mention the importance of livestock. It's not represented on the panel, but it is also an important sector for collaboration, where actually we all been working very hard. I'd love to maybe take, before we go to the closing remark, maybe if there's any question from the room? Yes, microphone, please.
Thank you. My name is Federico Narducci from Ruth Pedersen Public Affairs. Thank you for the interesting debate. My question is regarding new breeding techniques and more specifically new genomic techniques, which is a topic on hold now at the decision-making level, but hopefully next year, maybe the second half of next year, interinstitutional discussion will restart. Do you think that Canada, private or also institutions, could interact with the process, since Canada is way more advanced in respect to GMOs, techniques, and GTs? Do you think that there is a role here for Canada to play in engaging with the European decision makers? Because here, sometimes this type of debates can be very politicized, which slows down innovation in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Want to take it, Krista?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And I think let's acknowledge that consumers in the EU and in Canada have different perspectives around seed innovation, and that's okay. What I notice in Canada when we discuss NGTs, that the experience that developers and farmers who grow GMO crops, so farmers growing corn, canola, and soy, have been able to share insights and provide advice to other commodities, to wheat or pulses or oats or other crops that haven't had the experience and the challenges of GMOs, in terms of messages about early communication between the developer and the exporter and the end user and the consumer. So what I'm seeing in North America around gene editing is much more willingness on the part of developers to engage the consumer, share the benefits, talk about the traits under development. So that leaves me optimistic for the future of gene editing, that perhaps we won't make the same mistakes. And I hope that that is a discussion and a dialogue that Canada and the EU could have as well.
Thank you. And actually, Canada is also a very important exporter of bovine semens and have a great expertise in terms of biotechnology. And that's an important topic because we do have that expertise. So we'll be more than happy to contribute to the discussion. Any other question? Yes, one right here.
Hello, my name is Chris Lane, and I am with Economic Development in Regina, Saskatchewan, so the capital city of Saskatchewan in Canada. And I have a background in agriculture, beef cattle genetics as well. And the discussion that we're having right now is so important around what the future for both food sustainability, but also food security and production is going to be. So do you have any advice for the room on how do we make sure that that conversation, we've said it a couple times, around science-based decision-making is the first decision-making criteria when it comes to allowing access and market development and the products that you all represent. We know in Saskatchewan that canola, for example, is grown in a way, thanks to GMO and thanks to farming techniques, that is orders of magnitude less carbon intensive than the next competitor for both the oil and the protein. So how do we make sure that those benefits and those opportunities don't get lost in the politicization perhaps of some future trade negotiations?
Thank you for a great question. Who wants to take it first? Tanja?
I think it's a very, very important and relevant question indeed. Just again, my view and one opinion here, I feel that very much in these more polarized conversations, we tend to sometimes leave out in terms of what we see are the benefits, right? So I think it's in terms of, we tend to get stuck a little bit in terms of the discussing the technicality. So I think sometimes it is a bit getting that helicopter view and seeing, okay, from a more long-term sustainability perspective, this kind of makes sense, right? And I think also being a bit bold, a bit brave, right? Some of these conversations require politicians that are actually a bit brave to bring up these conversations in the public space. And that requires a little bit of political capital, indeed. So and that's also to my point that I think it is quite critical to also have the consumer view with, because I think that will also kind of get more the politician, the policy, and the governments also more on board to kind of bring up these conversations.
Yep. Communication is key to all of that, definitely. Krista?
That was a great answer, and I can't add too much to that, except to say that I think we also need to encourage our politicians to continue to defend our SPS agreements under the World Trade Association and to stand up for those science-based principles at the global level.
Oh, yeah, I think that the science world, the academic world, has a role to play as well, because, of course, the industry is, well, as always suspected to push its own interest, which is fair, of course. But so you have the politicians, you have the consumers, you have the industry, and you have the scientific people, the academic. I think it's critical to involve them, not to try to instrumentalize them, but to involve them so that they can bring this science basis and confidence in all these regulatory discussions.
It's a perfect summary, because sustainable food system is actually all about working together. And it's a combination, and we started with that earlier at the beginning of the day. It's private sector, it's government, it's academic, it's consumer. So it's all of that together, and don't forget farmers. So everybody at the table, and that's what together we're going to be able to build that sustainable food system. So I think it's a good wrap up. I'm going to give you maybe a minute if you have anything you'd like to add, and then we'll actually call it a day, I guess. Anything to add, Tanja?
Yeah, I just want to say really kind of a shout out to the organizers here today. I truly believe in terms of kind of fostering that collaboration, these kind of arenas is great. It's the first time I'm participating in it, and just kind of opening your mind a bit in terms of what opportunities lies, and just kind of thinking in terms of getting out of your own sandbox a bit. I think that's great. So just a big shout out to Sam and his team for organizing this event today.
I think the thought I'd like to leave you with is a comment I made at the opening, that agricultural sustainability and climate change are very interconnected issues. And just to build on the comment from Saskatchewan earlier, it's hard to overstate the contribution that GMO crops, and specifically herbicide-tolerant crops and herbicide-tolerant cropping systems, have the sustainability contribution that these have made in Canada. And I hope that moving forward, even if Canada and the EU continue to have slightly different perspectives on these technologies, we find a way to make sure that we can each use the tools that are appropriate in our environment, in our farming production systems. Because if we had to give up those crops, we would be potentially going back to plowing, potentially releasing megatons of CO2 into the atmosphere that we don't today because of these tools. So it's about flexibility for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. And Jean-Luc?
Oh, yes, if I may add another example of useful dialogue between Canada and the EU, it would be between farmer associations on the adoption of new technologies, because having new technologies is one thing, but using them is another thing. And we can see that there are very diverse rates of adoption of technologies from one side to the Atlantic. For instance, because as an example, remote sensing, precision agriculture hardware are more used on the western shore of the Atlantic than on the eastern shore. So there are many challenges for the adoption: lack of skills, digital divides, lack of confidence on data sharing, etc., etc. So I think that's also exchanging best practices between farmer associations, for instance, would be useful.
Thank you very much. So please join me in thanking our amazing speaker for today. It's been a pleasure. And I'll give back the mic to Sam.